The figure in the mirror was smiling at me long before I noticed it. When I finally saw it standing behind my reflection, I spun around so violently that I knocked over a display cabinet. There was nobody in the room except me. The antique shop had already closed for the evening, and every door was locked from the inside. Yet the reflection remained visible even after I stepped away from the mirror. It stood there with its pale face and black eyes, watching me from a place that did not exist. Then the figure slowly raised a finger to its lips. The gesture was silent, but the meaning felt terrifyingly clear. It wanted me to stop asking questions. I wish I had listened. 3 months earlier, I had inherited my uncle's antique business after his sudden death. The shop sat on the edge of a forgotten town where old brick buildings leaned toward narrow streets as if sharing secrets. Business was poor, and most customers came only to browse. Among the dusty inventory was a handwritten ledger listing a supplier named Arthur Voss. My uncle had circled the name repeatedly and written a warning beside it. The note contained only 4 words: never sell his mirrors. Curiosity eventually led me to search for Arthur Voss. To my surprise, I discovered he was still alive despite being nearly 90 years old. He operated a small warehouse outside town that looked abandoned from the road. The old man greeted me with unusual caution. His eyes lingered on me, as though he already knew why I had come. When I mentioned the mirrors, his expression darkened immediately. He told me he was the last dealer in the country who specialized in mirrors manufactured before 1880. According to him, mirrors created during that era possessed qualities modern glass lacked. The explanation sounded absurd, but something about his tone made me listen. Before I left, he sold me 6 antique mirrors. As I loaded them into my truck, he spoke one final warning. He said the reflections were not always reflections. I laughed then. I never laughed again. The mirrors attracted attention almost immediately after arriving at my shop. Collectors traveled from neighboring cities to view them, and sales increased dramatically. For the first time in years, the business seemed profitable. Then the reports began. The first complaint came from a woman who purchased an ornate Victorian mirror. She returned 3 days later, looking exhausted and frightened. According to her, the mirror occasionally reflected an elderly woman standing behind her. The strange part was that the woman lived alone. Security cameras confirmed nobody else entered her apartment during the incidents. Yet she swore the reflection appeared every night at exactly 3 o'clock. I dismissed the story as imagination until another customer arrived. He claimed his mirror showed his living room exactly as expected except for one detail. His reflection was missing. Several weeks passed before he returned. His face looked pale and unhealthy, and he avoided making eye contact. He quietly begged me to take the mirror back. Soon more stories emerged. Customers described children appearing inside reflections. Others reported hearing whispers whenever they stood near the glass. One woman insisted she watched her own reflection continue moving after she walked away. The similarities between the accounts disturbed me deeply. None of the customers knew each other, yet their experiences followed the same patterns. Every report involved a mirror manufactured before 1880. I began examining old records connected to Arthur Voss's inventory. Hidden among stacks of documents were references to previous owners who had died under mysterious circumstances. Some disappeared entirely without explanation. One particular mirror appeared repeatedly throughout the records. Ownership changed dozens of times across more than a century. Nearly every owner experienced tragedy. My investigation eventually led me to a local historical archive. There I discovered journals belonging to a Victorian spiritual society that operated during the late 19th century. Their writings described mirrors as gateways rather than objects. The members believed mirrors trapped fragments of human consciousness. Through specific rituals, they attempted communication with those fragments. Most entries sounded delusional. Then I found photographs. The images showed identical mirrors arranged in a circle around seated participants. Every photograph contained unexplained figures, visible only inside the reflections. None appeared in the physical room itself. At that point, I genuinely didn't know what to do. If you had discovered what I found that night, would you have kept investigating or walked away forever? Let me know what you think before I tell you what happened next. Unfortunately, I chose to continue. One journal referenced a hidden chamber beneath an abandoned estate outside town. According to the writings, the society performed its final experiment there in 1879. Afterward, every participant vanished. The location still existed. I entered the estate shortly before midnight, carrying a flashlight and one of Arthur Voss's mirrors. Dust covered every surface, and the air smelled ancient. The silence felt unnatural. Beneath the house, I discovered a stone chamber exactly as described in the journal. Strange symbols covered the walls from floor to ceiling. At the center stood a massive mirror taller than any person. Unlike normal glass, its surface moved slightly like dark water. As I approached, my reflection appeared distorted. The room behind me looked wrong somehow. Additional figures occupied spaces that should have been empty. There were dozens of them, their faces pressed against the opposite side of the glass. Some looked terrified while others appeared furious. Every one of them stared directly at me. Then I recognized one face. It was Arthur Voss. The realization struck like lightning. The man who sold the mirrors was standing inside the reflection despite being miles away. His mouth moved frantically as if trying to warn me. Suddenly the glass rippled outward. An icy hand emerged from the mirror and grabbed my wrist. More hands followed immediately. They felt human and inhuman at the same time. The chamber filled with whispers. Thousands of voices spoke simultaneously. They repeated the same phrase again and again. They wanted someone to replace them. I struggled desperately, but the hands dragged me toward the surface. The mirror stretched around my arm like liquid darkness. For a horrifying moment, I saw another world beyond the glass. It resembled our reality, but twisted into something nightmarish. Endless figures wandered through shadowy streets beneath a sky without stars. Every face reflected terror. Then Arthur Voss appeared beside me. Not the elderly dealer I knew, but a younger version trapped inside the mirror world. He shoved me backward with all his strength. The grip around my body weakened instantly. Before disappearing, he mouthed two final words: "Break it." I grabbed a rusted iron stand and swung with everything I had. The massive mirror shattered with an explosion that sounded like thunder underground. The chamber shook violently. Every whisper stopped. Every hand vanished. The darkness beyond the glass collapsed into nothingness. I barely escaped before the chamber began caving in around me. By sunrise, much of the estate had collapsed into its own foundation. Authorities later dismissed the event as structural failure. Arthur Voss was never found again. When I returned to his warehouse, the building stood completely empty. No records proved he had ever owned the property. It was as though he had been erased from history. I sold the remaining mirrors to museums under strict conditions. None were placed on public display. I wanted them hidden where nobody would ever look into them again. Even now, years later, The experience follows me. Mirrors make me uncomfortable. I avoid standing in front of them longer than necessary. Sometimes I cover hotel mirrors with towels before sleeping. The worst incidents happen at night. Occasionally, I wake around 3 o'clock and notice movement inside a reflection across the room. When I turn toward it, the movement always stops. The glass appears perfectly normal. At least, it appears normal until I look very closely. Because sometimes I think I see Arthur Voss standing deep inside the reflection. He never speaks. He only points towards something hidden behind me. And one night, for the first time, I finally turned around to look. There was nothing there. But when I looked back at the mirror, Arthur was gone. Something else had taken his place. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to like this video, subscribe to Grave Nova Stories, and share your thoughts in the comments below. I'll see you in the next night.